Hello. Last Wednesday morning, about 10 o'clock, I had to look out the window and these two, shall we say, unidentified flying objects. From the point of view that I couldn't identify what I was actually seeing. So basically, it looked something like this. There was two of them, too high to be a bird, more sort of the height of civil aircraft. And yet their behaviour was more like a bird, the way a bird will flap its wings to propel itself forwards and then glide a little bit. So its movement is not like an aircraft. So there's two of these things. We draw the other one in here. Of course, I didn't have my phone was switched off, so by the time it would have come on, these things would have gone out of view. Terrible second drawing, but anyway. So there's two of these things, and then probably about 5 minutes later, there's a third one. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, I was asked this question, how did I feel? Well, certainly not fear. It was almost like a recognition that these things are not of this dimension, shall we say. But they were certainly very, almost like silver coloured, or certainly metallic and reflecting the sunlight. But it sort of came to me earlier, what do we got here? The way I've drawn it anyway, because it was two and then one. You've got a sort of shape. Particularly, it's these two lines that I wanted to think about. Now, if we see this as the mind's eye, and these as the two physical eyes, where else can we see this expressed? So we're going to this book again. Sort of got me thinking about two of the, you have to bear with me while I try and line this up, North Pole, and we go through roughly where the Great Pyramid of Giza is. And across to Florida. Because you've got basically that same shape depending on the way you orientate it. Now, some of you might be triggered by this, but I'm going to have to mention channels that where I'm seeing the common ground on what they're showing. So you've got Archaic's channel and Old World Florida. Now, certainly this to me makes perfect sense. You've got the Fertile Crescent, the Gulf of Mexico. Now that's mirrored by, in this sort of roughly in this area, you had a Gulf War. Florida is known as like the Sunshine State, readily associated with oranges. Then you have the House of Orange, which sort of comes into Europe, Dutch royal families, and comes through from Spain. And if I remember rightly, its origins come from what are known as the black nobility from Egypt, which apparently was due to the stones they used and basically adopted that colour, so it was like the black pharaohs. And then from that probably you've got the black Irish, the black Welsh, and it's one of numerous tie-ups between these areas. I mean, if you take the River Nile, flip it over, mirror it, and then overlay it over the Mississippi, which contains Isis in that word, you've got a mirror. So this Gulf Stream, this giver of life, so I would take that to be the representation of the divine feminine. You could see Florida perhaps as the phallus, and this is like the Pillar of Hercules, which of course is then mirrored over here. You've got things like the Seminole tribe with a tartan pattern, and there's a clear link to Ireland and Scotland. Now, when you come over to Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza, it's suggested, or it's said to be, a well that sits below that pyramid. It's like a capping stone, as it were. But if you look at the face of the earth and what is reflected in humanity, so we've gone from a natural divine feminine, and it's swung over. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico is fertile, it's life, it's creation. The Gulf that's over here is aggression and war, centered around this sort of, roughly this area. And all the conflict in the Middle East. So I would suggest that is probably the Middle West. Further to this, the ancient cultures of the North and South Americas talk about Atlantis as being to the east. The first civilizations that come in through Sumer, which connects with Suomi or Finland, Phoenician Finland. See, this thing connects on so many different levels, linguistics, flags, you name it. So you've got this like mirrored parallel. So when we move over to this divine masculine, and we're very much seem to be centered this side, but if you swing it back to the middle, maybe Atlantis was actually in the Atlantic. It's the midway point, but of course the midway point sits on 0 degrees, which goes right through Greenwich, London. Greenwich, notice it's green associated with the heart. It's certainly, the United Kingdom is the heart of the world's finances, because we're in this material shift. As I've said before, the Great Pyramid of Giza is basically like a architectural representation of humanity. It's particularly in those internal chambers. I mean, you think about it, you have an expression about chambers of the heart. And you could say that the brain or the mind has chambers, and by extension, you could say the gut also has various chambers in it as well. So I feel what you're being shown here with the outplay is this shift across. Now, I'm not saying you should all make an exodus back over to Florida or make an exodus, but I'm just pointing out how you've got almost like this compasses, this division that is expressed with these two sort of lines, sits on the 30 degrees. On this particular map, it looks to be 60 degrees around Florida, 60 degrees west, but then looking on Google, it's coming up with something like 80 degrees. I can't even remember now. But this is just as purely as an illustration that you've got these parallels, and you've also got, if you think about traditional dances, Catalonia, the Highland Fling, and various other traditional dances are all very similar. There is a commonality that links all of this up. And if you think about it, if you have a fertile crescent, and then you've got the Lone Star State, the crescent moon and the star, how many flags is that reflected on, particularly anything to do with Islam, which it's suggested that it starts here, but everything seems now to point that everything started over here. This sort of fertile crescent. And you've got this Gulf Stream as well. And then certainly when you look at this map, it would be certainly easier, the navigation, to follow that Gulf Stream, and then it comes round again like this. Creates a sort of circle. So you could say that the world does go round when you look at the face of it. So as this is a face and it's looking back at you, this would be the right side, so would be like the divine feminine, the right side of the brain. It matches with this. And the outgoing, aggressive side, the divine masculine, and of course, it also I feel reflects in this present day in everything that's presented, where we've shifted too far over to the divine masculine. It's ended as a bit of a disaster, and it's going away from nature. That seems to be reflected in this playout. I mean, if you think about it as well, if you picture a ball in your mind, now you can, I've said this before, you can go from anything from a golf ball to a rugby ball to a beach ball and everything in between. And you can keep flipping that in the mind. It's a ball, but when you try and bring it out into the physical, it can only take one form. So this esoteric message of shifting from divine feminine, from the right side of the brain, shifting over to the conscious left side of the brain and coming only from that side. And it's sort of, you can almost see the whole sort of trans agenda, if this is like the female side, why that is now being sort of represented as the sort of aggressor on the world stage, as it were, or certainly seems to be very much at the centre of a lot of the conflicts. They're very generous, this government, not the people, of course. They gladly sell all the weaponry and things to countries that are going to very kindly donate all their surplus things to keep conflicts going over on this side. So it's almost like a pendulum swing, but it's gone too far over, so we maybe need to bring it back to centre. And metaphorically, the thing that we're looking for, the centre of everything, it's expressed as a tornado, the eye of the storm. There's nothing in the middle. It's the centre of the vortex. There's nothing there. And you could say with Atlantis, there is nothing there. It's a metaphysical concept into today's world. Whether more is revealed, certainly around this coast, it goes 300 to 400 feet down, and there's cities and things, and no doubt you'd find things here as well, because this was probably just streams and probably all linked up at one time. But the way the world has been shaped today, you could say, in more than one sense. So I can't give you any answers as such, but just go with the flow maybe, and weigh things up between here and here in a sort of manner of speaking, and try and come back into balance. I mean, water is just a modality, no different from air. It's just the liquid rather than the gas state, but it is all one and the same thing. So when we talk about the creator of humanity in terms of being a fish god, it's readily associated with water. But what about water in the form of air? Just a few things I feel are worth weighing up, and that's basically the scales of Libra. If you were to hold the scales, you'd have the two chains going out and finding the balance from the feeling. This is where all my initial thoughts came from about this, what we call the new world, is actually the old world. It was just feeling. And then I looked at some of the etymology, and then I've found other channels. Mind Unveiled is another one. It's done a lot on part of Florida and all the associations with the Spanish and things. So check out those three channels. Move past personalities and who said what to whom. Is not this spiritual evolution and the way forward, to look at the commonality, the common ground where there is agreement, rather than focusing on differences. So we can say at last, Atlantis, in a metaphorical sense, we come back into balance. And that's just a little sort of demonstration of that sort of thing. Hopefully it'll make sense, but any questions, please feel free to ask, and I will do my best to answer everything that I can, or give you my interpretations on things is probably the more accurate way, and it's up to you to weigh it up inside yourself if that feels right to you. Right, I'm going to say love to you all, and ta-ta for now.